Good morning and welcome everyone who's joining us for our new Monday live slot, 8:30 till 9 a.m. GMT. We're live on LinkedIn, on Facebook and our YouTube channels, and recording this for our ongoing podcast available on Spotify. So thank you for joining us. First thing on a Monday, how are you doing, Ant?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm very good. I've got my coffee. I had a nice stroll along the beach on my way to work. So yeah, good way to start the Monday.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're having a great start. I know I'm very similar to lots of other parents out there. I currently have 2 kids off school with COVID symptoms. So starting my week knowing that there's going to be a few hurdles ahead. And I know that I'm not the only one. I know despite the restrictions lifting, there are lots of parents there who are looking after either poorly kids or people isolating. So my heart goes out to you. And particularly if you're taking the time to watch this later because you haven't been able to make it at 8:30. But what we're talking about this week is how are we humanizing work? What are we going to be doing this week? And I'm going to bring to the forefront of this conversation really what I'm focusing on as a CEO of Bailey and French. Thinking back about the last year, what we've done to navigate the challenges and the landscape, and also looking ahead. So I know I'm not alone as a CEO, trying to gather my leadership team, make sure we've got the right people in place, and looking ahead for our 22 plans. I know lots of people have their financial years starting at different stages, but it's still, for me, a very poignant point to be looking ahead and thinking, okay, so what does growth really mean? What am I actually going to commit to? How was it that we actually took hold of the opportunities in the challenging year that we've just gone through? And what can we do to learn from that, while still protecting our people and making sure that everyone's okay with the increasing number of new people we have, but also the way people are embracing and understanding work and our clients' needs changing. So that there's a lot in that, but that's kind of what's on my mind this Monday morning. Ant, what are you hearing from our clients? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. I think it's the time of year where everyone's looking ahead at the strategy and putting lots of things in place, or maybe you've got the strategy and the vision, but you're thinking about implementation. And actually, when you start to think about what resources do you have, what changes do you need to have, and almost we were talking about this last week about connecting that purpose and driving, but also not wanting to be too ambitious and overly ambitious to the point of detriment this year. You know, that importance of stability, I think, was really important. And what does growth mean was what we were touching on last week. And I think that's still very poignant. We've just come up against one of the biggest challenges, I think. You know, there's still lots of different experiences that people are going through. If you've got family, if you don't, if you live in a certain part of the country and you're remote, or whether you're in the office, there's such polarizations in the experiences of your people. That becomes an ever more important part of the strategy going into this year. And I guess the big question is just how do we, when we're having these discussions around strategy and about the year ahead, how do we and what are we focusing on to make sure that we can deliver on a strategy and we're not kicking ourselves 12 months down the line? It's an interesting topic for a lot of people, I think.
It is, and I certainly won't be alone when you look at business plans at the beginning of the year or in advance of your planning rounds. You always go back to your previous year's plan and documents, don't you? And you look at it and you go, wow, okay, so what did we do? And even though we do obviously quarterly reviews and monthly reviews like everyone else, it's very interesting to look at the energy that goes into a yearly plan and kind of what does the back end detail of that really look like when you've got, actually at the beginning of that year, we had no idea what 21 was going to look like. And I'm really happy there's actually some of the pieces in there I'm looking at and I'm going, oh, there's a big tick on that. We've absolutely done that. And what I find interesting about that is that in some areas, things have happened organically. And I look at them and I always say, you know, growth happens quite organically to us. And actually, in many cases, it doesn't. It's quite strategic. It's almost just that we've put so many different conditions in place that allow those growth areas to appear, that sometimes we don't take the credit for what we've actually achieved. And I think that for me is going to be a big one for us this year, is actually looking back and going, right, okay, so these were our plans. We had no idea about the uncertain landscape, but actually the big tick here, here, and here shows that we created the opportunity for those things to happen, and they happened well, and they've put us in a great position this year to forge ahead and continue focusing on them. Mm-hmm. Some of the things we didn't get around to, I look back and I think, okay, so did we just not get around to them? Were we just really busy and challenged with isolation, time out, you know, the pandemic, etc.? Or actually, did we reassess and readjust throughout the year and actually pay most attention to the things where we felt as we were moving through them were going to have the greatest impact and value? And actually, I think that's what we did. And so, you know, looking back on last year, I'm loving kind of looking at that and then looking at, okay, now let's readjust this. Now let's look ahead to 22, 23, 25. Where we're still on the same path, you know. We're not making massive changes in our business. We absolutely on a growth trajectory. But what does that mean? So when I break that down and I talk to the leadership team, we have a strategy day coming up, and that then we will share with everybody as well and get everyone involved in conversations around it. What will it mean for us to really think about paced growth rather than rushing things? What will it mean to us to put our people first and to ensure that the human experience isn't lost? We have, you know, such a dedicated team who are such hard workers. And I know it's very interesting what I've noticed in the office and on the online chats. We have these flurries of everyone having a great conversation, sending gifts to each other, having really good conversations. And sometimes that can go on for an hour or two. And it feels like everyone's in it together. It's really inclusive. And then there's other times when I know that, you know, you can hear a pin drop in the office and everyone's got their head down and they're just focusing on one piece of work. And they're almost waiting for the first person to break the silence. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, that's what we need, the ebb and flow. We need the ability to be able to do both when it suits us. For me, that's the human aspect of supporting people to be human, not regimented. Is that a good example? How do you experience that? Because you've been in the office more than I have this year.
Yeah, and I think it must be a really different experience, right? So we've got the kind of hybrid working model. We've got people who are working remotely. We've got people all over the world that work with us on certain projects and programs. And I guess they will experience it different than what you feel in the office. But certainly when you're in the office, it's about creating that environment. And we you know, you're absolutely right. As a leadership team, how are we creating that physical and psychological environment for people to ebb and flow in and out of those environments as and when whatever suits them? You know, you've got people responding to really complex solutions for clients, and you've got others who are maybe in the early stages of speaking to clients and getting into the kind of what's the word, like brainstorming ideas and getting into the flow of connecting with people and coming up with some really creative things. And I think it's really important for us to think about that for the year. Because I think as long as it's conscious, you know, every decision that we've made, or I feel like we've made as a leadership team this year, you're right, we haven't got round to some things. I was looking back at my plan over the weekend just to prepare for this week and for our preparations for the away day. What have we done? And I think as long as it's conscious, as long as we're creating that environment and we're making conscious decisions to drop things and being aware that, okay, these things probably can drop if we need them to, because we need to focus on these things because these are our strengths and these are the things that are most important to clients. I think as long as that's conscious, and of course collecting the data as we go is an important part of that. I think creating that environment where people are allowed to have that trust and to kind of embrace that ebb and flow as in how they need to use it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's also, I think, it's not just kind of ebb and flow in terms of well-being and concentration and distraction. I guess where my mind's going whilst you're talking is around innovation as well. And I read a great HBR article about whether large organizations are actually becoming innovation spectators rather than creating kind of actual innovation within teams. They're just allowing kind of people to know that there's a little innovation hub going on and everyone can kind of watch what's happening. And it takes me back to when I used to do quite a lot of facilitation of exec strategy days. And I remember one team I worked with, and the innovation or strategy director said to me, you know, my team were really excited. They wanted to show me something, and they took me to this big whiteboard where they'd had an afternoon coming up with all these fantastic ideas of what they were going to do with the company. And they took me through this innovation board of ideas, he said, and it was awful. None of it was relevant to the business. None of it was relevant to our strategy. It was completely disconnected. And we sat down and we unpicked what had happened, because he was distraught, and he was saying, you know, this was the worst thing they could have brought to me. But it really opened his eyes to the fact that they'd felt so left out. They hadn't been able to engage with what the leadership team had been doing. They'd been, you know, the leadership team had locked themselves away for several different meetings and telling people they were having important conversations about strategy, whilst everyone else was kind of getting on with the work and talking to the clients and hearing what the clients needed. And this fragmentation, this disconnect between what was really going on, was just fascinating, because, you know, he was distraught because he thought he was a great leader, very inclusive and engaging, but he'd just missed the point. He'd missed the boat of time in terms of people's energy levels wanting to talk about these things. He hadn't necessarily obviously listened in the way, and he'd empowered them to be able to take this day and spend this day kind of taking this time without knowing about it, and kind of came back going, I can't even believe they spent a whole day doing that. You know, the cost of the business of that many people coming together, and none of it is anything we can do or go for. And how do I even begin to manage that message back to them? And I'm like, wow, you know, this is huge, because there's an element there around the back to them message, which I think is important, because one of the things, you know, I'm constantly on our team about is, you know, there should be no them and us with the leadership team and the team. Everyone is working together. No one works for anyone. We work with each other. And that very subtle change in language and inclusion around how we work together actually gives people the ability to understand that we have to keep that constant sensing and understanding going on. So I think that ebb and flow is something Joshua used to use that term a lot, is so paramount to just sensing it as a leader, sensing what's happening. Are people feeling tired? Are people feeling excited? Are people feeling creative? And making sure that we're in touch with how people are, even in that hybrid world where we've got much less of those kind of senses around us, being able to feel them.
Yeah. And we had that wonderful feedback as you're talking. I think it's bringing, and we had the wonderful feedback, you know, as someone came into the office and said, oh, the office is almost simmering. And I thought that was a really interesting point. I thought that was a really, really interesting piece of feedback, because what it meant was we're ready. We're excited. There's an opportunity here and we want to grasp it. And therefore, as a leadership team, you're absolutely right. How do you then make sure that you are connecting with the people that are simmering and are excited and want to take on that growth, to make sure you have the proper conversations around growth and their role that they have to play in it, and feeling connected. I think there's an interesting point, though, if you're watching this and you don't feel like your organization is in that place, and maybe they're feeling quite tired, and you're worried about, you know, there's a lot of new people, and maybe people aren't feeling like they particularly know the vision, and they don't have the history of the company. You know, what are we doing as leadership teams and CEOs, etc., to bring that knowledge to the forefront and to re-energize and regroup and regather? We know that kind of transparency and clarity of message and communication between teams, and also the relationship between the manager, is often like the first thing to go when we're feeling tired and not quite up to our best selves. And that's probably the reason, or one of many contributing reasons, as to why a lot of people get it wrong when they're looking at the strategy and feeling that disconnect that person potentially was feeling at that time. It's a really interesting one. I think you're right. It's about the connection, the involvement in the strategy, but then it's not always possible, right? If, you know, you don't want to be putting out a referendum, but you know, of people, you know, that's the leader's role as well, to look ahead at things that potentially, and we've talked a lot about this on these live sessions, what's the role of the leader? And I think it's also about balancing that, listening to clients, making sure you're in the face of it and being close to the people who are closest to the customer, and then bringing that all the way back up and going, and here's where I think we need to be moving in the future. You know, Steve Jobs wasn't probably looking at the customer, because the customer wouldn't have ever dreamt about having, you know, the iPhone that we have today. Because that's what true innovation is about. It's about understanding the customer beyond their needs. And I think it's similar to employees and people. Sorry, not employees, it's people. I have to correct myself on that. This is people. You know, what do our people need? And maybe some of the time we can make decisions that are, you know, even further forward, I think, than what they might be able to see, because we see different things. Maybe.
So if I look back then to what was successful for us last year in terms of managing that ebb and flow that we can take through into our plans and strategies this year to ensure that people have clarity, I think there's two things that really stand out for me. I think there's the fact that, and I know you'll feel this as well, there was times last year when there was so much going on, right? And it was just actually very overwhelming for everyone. People were tired, people were confused, people, you know, under-resourced, and lacking clarity. And I think one of the things I did notice that we did as a team, that I think, as I said, I only really noticed in kind of retrospect, was that to a certain extent, we created a little bubble around us and kept going. And I think that was really interesting, that we were able to almost just like block out some of the enormity of what was going on so that we could work within our realm of influence and our realm of control and feel comfortable. And it was something I noticed that happened several points last year, and it only happened, I only realized it recently because there was so much going on. But actually, if I look at what happened, and I remember there were several points when I said, you know, I was talking to people, or when I first went back out into London and had loads of meetings in one day, and people were saying to me, you know, everything was so quiet and everything was completely, you know, not simmering. It was the opposite. It was really, it felt like, you know, London was just, it was awful. It was so quiet. On days that I thought would have been the busiest days, you know. Yeah. And I remember thinking, gosh, we've been in our bubble. Like, we've been just keeping on going, just focused on what we do, blocking out some of the things that we know we can't control, and kept going. And I think actually there's something very important about that, learning from that, about our ability to be able to focus on what we can control and not over worry about the things we can't. And I think that's been really interesting. And I think that happened as well when we were under-resourced too. So when business kept getting busier and busier, and with people changing roles, actually there was a sudden kind of like, oh, this is a bit uncomfortable, but we're just going to have to keep going with what we can do. Like, if we can focus so much on the things we can't do, but that won't help us. So an element of a positive mindset around there. The other thing I think that we did quite interestingly was the savouring of things. So I think we all thought there was going to be several points when it was kind of like starting to feel normal again, and it didn't happen. And then there was this slow, gradual kind of opening up, things happening, things not happening. Is there going to be another lockdown, pandemic? And the weariness from that, I think, was quite hard. But the one thing I did notice that we did was, whenever we did come together and we did something together as a team that helped connect us as humans, is that we savoured it. And I think we savoured it and we made the most of it. We talked about it. We talked about how it felt. We talked about it afterwards. We built it up beforehand so that actually it felt like a precious moment, a precious memory that we can put in our minds and we can return back to, even in the times when we can't do those things. And I think for me, those two things are what I will take forward into next year, because I think they mattered most in terms of people then being able to maintain clarity on what's going on around us, is that we've got those things to focus on that actually did go well. We've got those things that we savoured in terms of having good, strong connection. And that puts you in the focus, in the mindset of, I can do this. I am able to do this. And yes, I don't have clarity of every single thing in that big picture. But I know what I can focus on and I know what I can do. And I think for me, those two things, as I said, just being able to focus on what you can influence and can control, and also savouring the good moments when they come, I think has had a really good impact on our team, getting us to where we are now. And that will be certainly part of our strategy for going forwards. I don't know how much you recognise those pieces, but they stood for me.
Yeah, I do. And it's a fine balance. Again, the word balance, I guess, is going to come up for a lot of people throughout this year. And when they're talking about the strategies, we know that organizational resilience, individual resilience is all about taking day by day, minute by minute, savoring the positive and kind of not dismissing the negative, but recognizing that some of it's controllable, some of it isn't. And we just keep going. And we've got a choice in that, but we're choosing to stick at it because we know that it's worth it for the vision and the mission and the purpose, etc. And that's why having purpose and meaning in your role is so important. And we know the fundamentals of how to create that kind of psychological capital in people's minds to help them to do that. And then obviously at a team and organizational level. But it's also about balancing. If we're in our little bubble, how on earth are we creating that inclusivity and that understanding of others' experiences throughout this same time? And for us, we've done it because we've been looking at clients. We've been going into offices, or we've been at least meeting people and seeing people and hearing their experiences. And I think for a lot of organizations, if you're a tech company who's launching a new product and you've been really excited about this new product, well, are you really creating a product that's really tapping into some of these experiences? And how do you really connect with that? And the only way really to do that, and we talk a lot about this, why do people focus on the human experience? What is it about creating a more human experience, and why is that relevant to customers and to profit and to all of these things, the kind of so what? And one of the key reasons is because technology or the products or services that your organization is delivering, if it doesn't tap into these experiences that people are having, you won't have a product and service in a year's time. You'll lose your key talent because they'll not quite believe in the vision and the product and the service, and they'll go somewhere else. They've got that choice, or the product just won't land and it will fail miserably and you'll run out of money, etc. And I think the way to do that is to connect people within the organization, to share those experiences internally, to create that curiosity and those inclusive behaviors so that we can listen and we can evolve and we can adapt. And we can pick up on what's happening outside of our bubbles, as well as, okay, well, we're controlling in our controllables. And that's good for kind of mental resilience, but also in terms of solution and innovation and growth, getting out of our bubbles and getting our heads up a little bit sometimes is equally important.
And a lot of that involves a lot of talking, doesn't it? So talking and listening. And it's really funny. I mean, the leaders I've worked with, I just don't have enough time. They say, I wish I could sit around talking to people all day, but I've got so much to do. And this balance of, God, I wish I could listen. I wish I could engage. I wish I could innovate with people. I wish, we could involve everyone in everything. And actually, we have to really, really be strict with ourselves around the responsibilities and accountabilities of our role, actually, in terms of what the business needs. And there's a huge push to make sure that we're listening to people more and that people feel involved and included. And we've got to be very careful that we don't tip the balance too far in terms of entitlement and totally miss the business requirements, exactly as you said, because the business itself is what keeps us employed, is what keeps us doing what we love doing with that meaning and purpose. And so being able to make sure that you've got people who've got the eye on the ball and the eye on the business needs, as well as people who've got the eye on our people's needs, and balancing that out. And for me, that's the beauty of a fantastic leadership team, really, is making sure that you've got the right people around you, people that you trust, that that are going to really challenge your thinking and challenge each other, but also support each other and notice when people are flagging, when it's clear that someone's got a huge piece on and it's really tough. And also just reminding ourselves of what it is we're here to do, and making sure that we do stay on the right track and say, that's all well and good, and I love that you've done that, but you don't have time for that, so stop doing that and focus on what you can do. And I think that's really going to be a large part of my role this year, definitely, is to make sure that in all our critical roles, whilst we're energized and excited and we've got clarity, it's almost, the world's your oyster when you've got clarity, isn't it? I feel like, when you're sharply focused, you know exactly what you need to do. There is nothing holding you back. It's just this kind of force. And I've seen you on a Friday when it gets to, you know, Friday afternoon, and I said, Anne, you need to go home, because actually it gets to that point where it's just so much, even the good stuff, the good stress is too much, and it can cause burnout, and it can cause us all kinds of problems. So having that team, whether it's a leadership team, whether it's a product team, whether it's a matrix team, is being able to say to each other, do you know what? I can see what's going on here. And actually, I think maybe we could switch things up. I could switch things round. We could take turns. We could bounce ideas off each other. But being there and having someone sometimes just to talk it out with, that sounding board, is one of the things that I found as well very helpful in the last year, being able to say, this is what's going on in my head. And someone turn around and go, wow, that's really interesting because of this. And I was thinking this. And it's that amazing ability to build together when you're in dialogue that I think we all cherish and we love so much, but we often feel we don't have time for. But actually it gets us streets ahead, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I definitely recognize a lot of that. And I think it's about having the self-awareness, but also having the other awareness, you know, noticing when other people in the team, the leadership team or the generic team, I suppose, and just, hey, are you sure you're focusing on the right stuff? Are you sure? And then both ways, having that positive intent. You know, I'm not checking up on someone because I think that they're doing the wrong thing, and that negative mindset. You know, how do we overcome challenges positively together is a question being asked by a lot of our clients at the moment. You know, how do we build that mindset into people? Because approaching those conversations with the positive intent, that person is not bad. That person is not trying to mess it up on purpose. That person probably was listening, but maybe heard something subtly different, because we're different human beings. We're wired differently with different experiences. But let me go and have that conversation, that self and other awareness. And this is where I always say, you know, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, because if you go slow, it's smoother. It may take a bit of time to connect with the people, to have a conversation, to do the disciplined things. And it might take all morning, all day, you know, what have you. I think when we talk about the question of how do we maintain clarity within our new strategies, I think it's going to be ever more important to have that time. And it is going to potentially feel frustrating if people are wanting to move at pace. But it's important. It's important to go that slow, especially to begin with. It's like any good delegation, right? You go slow to begin with, and you check in regularly. Have you got it? Are you sure? Any questions? What are you thinking? And you come back to it continuously. And then over time, you can kind of leave them to it and help them to create their own version of what they think you've kind of delegated. And I think that gets the best results. That's the balance between empowerment, but also delivering on a strategy and delivering growth. But definitely going slower and smoother is a lot healthier, I would say, than.
It is. And I think it causes people a lot of stress, if I'm honest, because when you get to this point of year and you're reviewing your own objectives against the year, and you look back and you look at the things you haven't done, isn't it easy to focus on all the things you haven't done rather than the things you have done, despite what we've been through? And there must be so many people in that situation right now. And, you know, that's the power of almost like there's an essence there in the philosophy of positive psychology around, you know, focusing. I think it's kind of, you have to think of five positive things to outweigh even just 3 negative things, because our tendency is to focus on what's wrong, what we should have done, what we've missed. And actually that can cause a lot of stress for leaders who are kind of having their reviews with people at the moment and saying, look, you know, I just didn't get around to it. I didn't get to that. Didn't even get on my radar. Love to have done it. And it's going to go on to this year's plan instead. But there's something there about leaders being able to appreciate and accept that and say, do you know what, actually, it's fine. We're in the right place. We're in the right place for us. We're in the right place for the business, and we're all still here. And that's probably something to really be celebrated and savoured. And I'm hoping that lots of people are in that situation. And I know lots of people have moved as well, because they want to be in a situation where they're successful and achieving. And I think we need to definitely recalibrate what that means to us all. And lots of people are doing that in this kind of great reassessment, aren't they, in terms of what's most important in terms of their achievements and accomplishments. So it is tough, it is hard, but if you look back at the full picture and say, right, with everything that went on in my personal life as well as, you know, my work life last year, actually this is what we came to, That's incredible. And I look back and I'm really pleased with where we are. So thank you. And thank you to all my team who are listening and everyone who's been involved with that, our clients and our partners. We're enjoying moving forward and looking ahead to our growth plans. And I hope you are too. So we've got to the end of our half-an-hour session this morning, and I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who's joined us. And I really wish everyone the very best in health and in work this week. And we look forward to chatting again next week about humanising the world of work.
Thanks, Alex.